Hey there, and happy Superman Day. So today's April 18th, and so that is the anniversary of when this book here, Action Comics #1, came out back in 1938. Now, unfortunately, the copy I'm going to look at here today is not an original. That is well outside of my price range for a book, unfortunately. So, lucky for me anyway, DC reprinted this version of Action Comics #1. This is a Facsimile edition that just came out this year for Superman Day. We've got the little Superman Day emblem on here. Now, DC has reprinted this before, several times. They have done a Facsimile edition before of this too, but it was at more of the modern comic size, whereas this is the size that the comic was originally produced back in 1938. So it's kind of nice getting the, correct size for the book here. Again, this would be the closest most of any of us get to, the real thing. So it's kind of nice having this. So we start up here. And so first thing, we have an ad here on the inside cover of like a little drawing contest sort of thing they have. And it says, turn to the feature Chuck Dawson, which is like a Western feature later in the book. And you'll notice that it is printed in black and white. Now take out your crayons and color the first page of Chuck Dawson. Then when you've colored it the best you possibly can, tear out the page, put it in an envelope, and send it into this magazine. Kids from 1938, please don't do that. You will regret it. So yeah, I don't know how many kids entered this contest, but there is a cash prize of $1 each to the best 25 entries they got. So we've got $25 in cash prizes here. So yeah, you don't have to be an artist or a cartoonist to do it. So yeah, there's that. I don't know if they were just trying to get kids' addresses back then or what the deal was with that. But yeah, that's crazy to think that, looking back, some kid would have done that. Now again, back in the day, nobody thought comics would, stick around. It was just sort of a disposable medium, probably closer to how we think of, newspapers today or something. But yeah, just, oh man, can you imagine if you were a kid that did that and had an Action Comics #1? So first off, here we get right into it. This is, the introduction of Superman here. Here we get, sort of a quick tale of the destruction of Krypton, which, just here, it's just described as, an old planet. It says it was destroyed by old age, so no tectonic plate issues or the red sun or Brainiac or anything else that we've kind of gotten over the years for sort of the explanation of the destruction of Krypton. Again, just real kind of bare bones compared to what we'll get over the next 80 some years of Superman stories. And it makes sense, but that is here right from the beginning. But Superman's vehicle landing on Earth and him going to an orphanage, and then this baby lifting chairs, and kind of talks about what he can do physically. It lists leap an 1/8 of a mile, hurdle a 20-story building. Again, not flying yet. That will come later. Raise tremendous weights, so we have like an I-beam here he's listed. Run faster than an express train. Again, not a speeding bullet yet, but an express train. And nothing less than a bursting shell could penetrate his skin. So, at this point, explosives could still hurt him, theoretically here. We have our, this is the first little panel here of Superman. And here he's described as champion of the oppressed, the physical marvel, who had sworn to devote his existence to helping those in need. And then we have sort of a little scientific explanation here for how his strength works. And it, kind of talks about insects that have strength that is like disproportionate to their size. Kind of introducing that idea for Superman. So we start off here, and Superman is jumping through the air with this woman, and he goes to the governor's house and demands to see the governor, stating it's a matter of life or death. He has to talk to the governor tonight in the middle of the night. And so he picks up the governor's assistant, butler, bodyguard, I'm not sure, lifts him up the stairs. He tells him this is where the governor's bedroom is. You can't get through this steel door. Which, now my first thing is, why does the governor have a steel door to his bedroom? But here comes Superman showing up in the middle of the night. Maybe, you know, it wasn't such a crazy idea after all, even though it doesn't really stop him. Now here we see the assistant, you know, threatens Superman with a gun. Superman tells him to put that toy away, and he fires. But again, you know, we know bullets don't have any effect on Superman here. And now we have this sort of ticking clock here in the panels. And so Superman has proof here that there's a woman set to be executed and only the governor could save her. And, you know, there's just, you know, a few minutes left here. Once the governor sees the evidence that Superman's provided, he calls the prison and stops the execution at the last second here. The woman that he left on the lawn is the apparent actual murderer here. The next day, you know, we see someone reading the newspaper talking about what happened last night and, you know, the woman being saved on death row. Clark checks the paper and sees there's no mention of him in there, which is kind of interesting. Again, it almost would seem like the government doesn't want to acknowledge that Superman was involved. Clark goes into work at the Daily Star. Again, it's not the Daily Planet yet. The newspaper he works for is the Daily Star here. And that would carry over into the Earth 1 Superman, or I'm sorry, Earth 2 Superman later on in like DC's Silver Age. His editor tells him that he's going to be covering the Superman story and trying to find out what he can about this new guy. And Clark says, "Listen, Chief, if I can't find out anything about this Superman, no one can." Haha, wink, get it? Because he is. So, now someone in the bullpen here tells him, "Hurry, Kent, a phone tip, wife beating at 211 Court Avenue," and Clark says he's on his way. Now, how the newspaper found out about like a domestic disturbance in progress, I don't know. It seems like the priority would be to call the police in this situation. You know, what we see here is Superman stopping this guy from abusing his wife. I always find it interesting that this is, you know, sort of the first criminal we see Superman stop, you know, in the story. I don't know if that ties into the creators of Superman, if they had a personal experience with that or anything like that in their lives. But I always thought it's notable that, you know, that's the first guy that Superman kind of fights here, that, you know, he stops. Then the police do show up. You know, Superman changes back into Clark Kent and tells the police, like, it looks like Superman stopped this guy. Then later at the office, we have Clark asking out Lois Lane here, kind of getting that whole romance started. And again, this is issue 1 that this is coming up, so this isn't something that developed later in the story. You know, this is pretty early here, you know, as early as you can get. So then, you know, they're out dancing that night, and this thug kind of butts in, wants to dance with Lois, and Clark tells her to just go along with it, and she's not having it. So then Lois storms out of there, and, you know, Clark has to look like, you know, the wimp here in the story. It's not really established yet that Clark is trying to put on a facade so people don't suspect that he's Superman. It almost just reads like that's just Clark's personality for some reason here. Again, we know, you know, through the sort of trope of the secret identity that would be established, that a lot of this is just misdirection on his part so people won't suspect that he's Superman. Without that context, it plays kind of weird here. But so then Lois leaves, the thugs chase out after her, and Clark changes back into Superman here. And so the thugs kind of run Lois off the road here and kidnap her. And here we have Superman saving her. I do like this panel here of the thugs freaking out when they see Superman. Again, it's still really kind of cartoony kind of scene. We've got, you know, sweat beads flying off of their foreheads. We've got the guy, you know, his hat flying off because he's so scared. Again, real kind of cartoony tropes that would kind of go away over the course of superhero storytelling. But again, you know, this is still the comic medium trying to figure out the language and what we're doing here. So, you know, you see a lot of that in Golden Age stories that kind of fell by the wayside over the decades. But it's kind of nice seeing more cartoony kind of stuff here early on. You know, kind of an example here is we have this big yow scream here once Superman picks up the car. Again, that would definitely be like a, you know, a voice bubble or something later on, you know, in modern day comic. So here we have Superman picking up the car, shaking everybody out, catching Lois. And then we've got, sort of the cover image here of Superman smashing the car on the rocks here as the guys flee. So yeah, like what we have here. Then Superman grabs the thug, who's named Butch here, and puts him up on a telephone pole. This is a nice panel here too of Superman telling Lois, "You needn't be afraid of me. I won't harm you." I want to say Alex Ross did sort of an interpretation of this panel too. I think that's who it was. But again, it's also sort of an early days, kind of thing where we know the context of this now. He's trying to reassure her and make her feel safe. But again, from her body language here, she definitely looks frightened of this guy who just came out of the sky and threw these guys out of a car and then trashed it. So yeah, it's a little, and again, this is the first superhero. So, we have, stories of heroes saving princesses and that kind of thing. Obviously, we don't have everything so clearly defined yet in the superhero genre with this. But yeah, Superman takes her back to the city and, he says to her, "I'd advise you not to print this little episode." Well, it's Lois Lane, so what's she going to do? She's going to tell her chief, and try to come up with, a story for this. But he says to her, "Are you sure it wasn't pink elephants you saw?" Again, sort of the drunk stereotype sort of thing. But again, here she is then giving Clark the cold shoulder for, how he treated her last night. And then Clark's boss gives him an assignment to go to a South American republic, San Monte. It sounds like, there's a war going on down there. But it says Kent takes a train not towards San Monte, but to Washington, D.C. And we don't really get an explanation for that here. Like, why isn't he going where he's been assigned? He's going to Washington instead. Then we run into this scene of somebody trying to bribe a senator here, it looks like. And Superman's kind of eavesdropping here. Kind of intervening here. Where he approaches the man and is, why is he trying to corrupt the senator? And he's like, "I don't know what you're talking about." So Superman grabs him and starts running across telephone lines here and, freaking the guy out, saying, birds don't get electrocuted on telephone wires until they hit the pole and are grounded. So he kind of just jumps right over the pole here, freaking the guy out. They can see the Capitol. And Superman's like, "Hey, can I jump all the way to that building?" And the guy's screaming, "Don't." And he jumps and just falls short of it a little bit here. And that's our to be continued here. So, now we have a little ad here saying, "Come back to the next issue of Action Comics to keep reading the adventures of Superman." And so that's it. That's the first Superman story here. Again, like some other facsimile reprints DC has done, the story continues in issue 2. It would be nice to get a reproduction facsimile issue of that too, just to finish the story, if nothing else. But again, I know Superman's not on the cover to Action Comics #2, so I don't know if that's a harder sell for DC, if they, would consider doing that or not. But it'd be nice to kind of finish the story if this is the only way you're reading it. So now, this wasn't just, this was Action Comics, so it wasn't just Superman. So here we have the Chuck Dawson feature that was talked about on the front cover here. And this is Chuck Dawson by H. Fleming. So this is sort of a Western feature. Now this is all in black and white, which I think is interesting because, Superman is, in color. So I don't know if this was intentionally made black and white for the coloring contest. I kind of doubt it. I feel like they just had a black and white feature and said, "Hey, we could do a coloring contest with that." So yeah, we've got that. And then we've got Zatara, Master Magician. So if you read more modern DC comics, you know that is Zatanna's father here. So again, another color feature here. Oh, and then we have this text story, South Sea Strategy. So if you're not aware, back in the day, comics had to have some sort of text feature in them. I think it was like a thing with the post office, like classifying it as like a magazine or something like that. That way they could ship them cheaper. Then we have this more cartoony kind of feature, Sticky Mitt Stimson. Again, almost looks like a Katzenjammer kid sort of thing. Then we have The Adventures of Marco Polo. So it looks like a more historical kind of story. Then we have Pep Morgan by Fred Gardner. And again, somebody that we'll see later on. A lot of these creators, would go on to do other sort of superhero stories for DC. This looks like more of like a boxing story here. Then we're back to black and white here with Scoop Scanlon, 5-star reporter. It's kind of interesting to see another reporter story in here, since we do have Superman and Clark Kent as sort of the main feature. Then we have back to color. We've got Tex Thompson by Bernard Bailey. Again, so like another Western story. Again, Westerns were real big back then, so it's not surprising to see another Western story. What I do think is interesting about this one is the use of curved corners on the panel borders for the stories. Again, this is sort of early days of comics and kind of figuring out what the format is and everything. So nowadays, if you saw a narrative with curved corners on the panels, it would almost imply like a TV screen or a movie or something like that. Saw a lot of that in like Dark Knight Returns and different stories. But I'm sure back then this is more of just like an aesthetic choice for the story. Then our last thing here is Stardust by The Stargazer. So this is just sort of like little anecdotes about, celebrities from back in the day. Or, well, contemporary at the time, I guess. Then our last, feature here on the inside back cover is Odds and Ends by Moldoff. And this is just sort of like little facts or like stories about different sports figures, different athletes. We've got Lou Gehrig here and Babe Ruth. And then here on the back, we've got sort of the old school ad for stuff they're selling in comic books. How to hypnotize someone or buy, rings or a camera or different crazy things they were selling to kids back then. Yeah, so that is the first issue of Action Comics there and our introduction to Superman. Now, unfortunately, the original version of this goes for millions and millions of dollars now, and so that's out of my price range. So it's nice that DC, made this facsimile edition here that we can enjoy. And, at the actual size it was made back in, 1938. So yeah, that's about it. Have you read Action Comics #1 before? Again, it's been reprinted many times over the years. It's pretty easy to find nowadays. You pick up this version for Superman Day. Let me know in the comments below, and thanks for watching. If you'd like to follow me on social media, I'm on Twitter/X @Detective651, also on Instagram @Detective651. Be sure to check out my t-shirt store at tpublic.com/user/Detective651. I've got a lot of nerdy designs on there, and there's sales all the time, so check it out frequently.